Hello everyone, Ffxiv here, and welcome back to the video. TTS was a huge failure. Everybody seemed to hate it, so I got my own mic. So we're going to use my voice for today, and I hope everybody's content with that. In this video, we're going to be putting the jobs together in ranks, fighting game style. While this list truly is my opinion of how the jobs should be ranked, it is my opinion and shouldn't be taken as the gospel. I'm always up for discussions in the comments sections, however, as I enjoy debating these kinds of things. Finally, 14 isn't really a fighting game, so this thing doesn't work perfectly, but I think it's just good to have fun. The balance is really good right now, probably better than it's ever been in this game's history, but some jobs do have clear weaknesses or strengths that makes them less or more desirable in the party, and I just want to elaborate on these things. It is a little late in the expansion, but I don't think it's too late, as all the jobs have gotten all their final buffs, so I think it's the perfect time to rank the jobs. So let's dive into this list. So this is it, the final tier. SS tier is for the jobs that are absolutely insane, if not entirely broken. These are the jobs that everyone pretty much should be wrapping their fingers around, or they just don't have a chance to compete with how insane they can be. We start off with the nuclear bomb laser cannon that is Black Mage. I feel like a lot of people will disagree with me on this one because of the strong misconception that jobs can't perform if they don't have utility, but that is somewhat incorrect. The way it really works out is when you look at the personal DPS of a job and the raid utility that they provide, you want to add them together, and that's really how much kind of DPS that they're doing. So if you were to compare something like Black Mage to Ninja, Black Mage kind of competes with Ninja in that case. Black Mage is pretty close, its damage is really high, somewhat matching Ninja's personal DPS plus its trick attack DPS. Trick attack is usually around 1000 DPS, whereas Black Mage is usually about 1000, if not even a little higher than that when comparing Ninja to Black Mage. So Black Mage is doing pretty well for itself. It even has its own comps, like if you look at Triple Range is Dragoon, Summoner, Bard, and Black Mage. Black Mage is extremely well in that comp. So does Summoner, by the way. Summoner is kicking ass in that comp, actually. Doing way better than any job. But it's a really strong comp, a very strong comp, and Black Mage is in it, and I think that's an excellent thing. And then a lot of you are probably wondering, well, why does Black Mage get so high, but Samurai is so much lower on the list? You could say this depends on the fight, but for the number one reason, Black Mage just does way more damage to Samurai. Samurai does not compete. I mean, it can in some special cases, but it just, on average, it does not happen very often. The number two reason why Black Mage isn't really struggling like Samurai is because Black Mage does not have to compete with the same spot that Dragoon and Ninja are competing for when it comes with Samurai. Samurai, whenever it's in the party, on average, it's replacing, you know, a Ninja or a Dragoon or even a Monk if you really want to go there. Whereas Black Mage, at best, they're replacing a caster or a machinist. I think Black Mage is strong enough to replace any of those jobs, but Samurai is not strong enough to replace any of the jobs currently in its slot, which is very unfortunate for it. The competition in the melee slot is ridiculous right now. It's actually really unfortunate for Samurai. So yeah, Black Mage just has a better lineup to compete against. So that's really just Black Mage's road to glory here, as it just does a relentless amount of damage. It's so much that a lot of jobs are either here to buff it or they can't compete with it with the slot that they're supposed to be doing. So that's really Black Mage's thing here. Now Black Mage has very excellent synergy with buff because of the style of Black Mage's rotation. It's not about burst, but more about constant damage. It's always doing the same thing over and over again. The rotation never really changes. It's very linear. It's not a very difficult rotation either. If you were standing still, you're just on a dummy, you could probably just do this rotation one-handed. It's really not that hard, but that's not really where the difficulty of Black Mage really comes from. The difficulty really comes from, well, moving. It's very hard to move on Black Mage, and it's really up to you to be able to use your kit to work around not having to move or having to move, but keeping your casts rolling, keeping your GCD rolling. So what a Black Mage really is trying to do is they want to use their toolkit of procs, swift cast, triple cast, and their expertise on slide casting, also pre-positioning, to keep their rotation moving. That's kind of the thing with Black Mage. You have to have fight knowledge and you have to have pretty good rotational knowledge in order to nullify the penalty of having to move with mechanics, or you don't want your damage getting screwed over because of things like that. So Black Mage is pretty good at nullifying the whole not being able to move if you're using your brain. You gotta have a pretty big brain to play Black Mage, I'm not gonna lie. Like, people look at the rotation like, oh, this is easy. It's not very easy. You could probably see me in the footage. I am completely bombing Black Mage. I'm not the greatest at it. I've had some fun with it in the 24-man, but in O9S, I am bombing completely. Once Black Mage has exhausted all of their options, and slide casting or P-positioning isn't really possible, there isn't really much they can do. They pretty much just have to move and work with their rotation with that if they don't have any other option. You might say they have Ffxiv, but no one talks about Ffxiv. You might as well just take that off your bar. It does work a little bit for, ending a fight, I guess, but otherwise Ffxiv is really bad. But that's pretty rare. It doesn't happen very often. Moving on to Black Mage's AoE, it has the most vicious AoE in the game, probably only matched by Summoner. I think Summoner is a little higher, but I don't know that for sure. I don't have any math on that, but they're pretty close. Black Mage has things like Flare, which is basically an AoE Fire 4, pretty close to it anyway before the Fire 4 buffs, but it was basically an AoE Fire 4. It has fall off damage, so even though it's still pretty fucking incredible. It does have a very long cast time, but with the usage of things like Umbral Hearts and then triple cast, you can get a couple of those bad boys off. You can even use conversion, and you can get 3 flares off, so 3 AoE Fire 4s and hit packs with it. Black Mage also has Thunder 4. This is an AoE dot that they can place on everybody, and initially it's not really all that impressive. But the true power to this AoE dot is that when it gets a Thunder proc, it's a very low chance, but when it does happen, Black Mage has the ability to use an AoE dot that all the damage comes in the front of the hit, and then it reapplies that dot on the ads again. And this AoE Thunder 4 has no fall off, so it's incredibly strong. Thunder 4 is just crazy potency when you really think about it. And then you have Foul, which is literally Black Mage's hardest hitting move. No contest. It's also just an AoE, it just happens to be an AoE. So it hits everything extremely hard. It does have fall off too, but I don't think it's as bad as Flares. Either way, it still hits insanely hard. If you want to look at Black Mage's single target rotation, it's pretty simple. You want to use Blizzard Thief first, to go into your Umbral Ice form. This is Black Mage's MP regenerative stance, and allows you to use ice spells, but at a slightly higher cost. That's not really the problem. You gain loads of MP in this stance, and this is how you will manage your pretty much only resource that you have to kind of worry about. So then after that, you would initiate Enochian. Enochian is the ability that allows you to use higher level magic, so Fire 4 and Blizzard 4. It also increases your magic damage dealt by 10%. After that, you would apply your Thunder Dot, and then you would use Blizzard 4. Blizzard 4 grants you 3 Umbral Hearts, and Umbral Hearts are what you use to save MP when you're using your fire spells, specifically Fire 4, but it works in Fire 1 too. It works on all your fire spells, but you want to use it in Fire 4. So after you've gained those Umbral Hearts, you want to use Fire 3 to switch into Astral Fire. Astral Fire is actually a ridiculously crazy stance. At 3 stacks, you get 80% damage up on all your fire spells. Yes, 80%. This is true. I didn't know this for the longest until a long time after I started playing the game, and I was like, what the fuck, Black Mage is actually crazy. So this buff window actually lasts for about 13 seconds. You can refresh it with Fire 1, but it's a pretty tight window to deal with because your goal in this window is to use as many Fire 4s as possible without using anything else unless it's like a Thunder proc or something. And this is really where the meat of Black Mage's rotation and mechanics start to come in. So like I said, only Fire 1 can refresh this buff, only Fire 4 does not refresh this buff whatsoever. So what you're really trying to do is cast as many Fire 4s as you can until you run out of MP while keeping this powerful damage buff up. If you drop this buff, you not only lose the damage buff from Astral Fire, but you completely lose Enochian. And this is why Black Mage struggles with things like moving, because the buff window is so tight that you're not only losing Fire 4 cast, you're also just losing Enochian, which even if you were to put Astral Fire back up, because it's not that hard, you just use a Fire 3, you can't use your Fire 4s anymore, so you're basically just spamming Fire 1. That's not a lot of damage, it's a huge damage loss. Your rotation becomes absolutely crippled. You won't enjoy playing Black Mage at all. So, if you find yourself dropping your buff and there's no way you're going to save it, you can always transpose to at least save Enochian. It still kind of sucks, but it's something, especially if Enochian itself is on cooldown. Well, there is one more thing. The longer you keep Enochian up, you get your Foul, and Foul comes up every 30 seconds as long as Enochian is still active. Even if you lose Enochian though, if you have a Foul save though, you can still have Foul, which is important to know. So yeah, Foul is basically Black Mage's strongest hitting move. In terms of utility, it doesn't really have much. You could say that it's a great mana battery because of Mana Shift, but I've heard some Black Mages complain about using Mana Shift because obviously when they're in Fire, they're not giving you any mana. That's for them. When you're in Blizzard, sure they can give you mana, but I've heard that it kind of screws up their rotation a little bit with the either MP regenerating or just the clipping in general, which is not very fun. So I find that Black Mages really don't like using that. But being a magic caster in general gives you some pretty powerful utility in terms of your role actions. So don't sleep on those if you are a Black Mage. I'd state the cons of Black Mage, but there isn't really much else to say. I think you guys get the big picture. It doesn't really like moving, it's got a tight rotation, and make any mistakes and it's done. You're just not doing damage anymore. Honestly, I don't really know if a job really should be this powerful. It just does way too much damage. I don't know how Samurai was supposed to compete with this. It's really not fair. I see a lot of people say that the reason Samurai is lower and the Black Mage is higher is because, well, Black Mages have to move, and if they can't move, well, their damage falls dramatically. But maybe it's because Black Mage doesn't really have a lot of bad matchups this tier. Black Mage is looking really ridiculous right now, and I hope Samurai can match this in Shadowbringers, or at least I don't even know if utility jobs should be this powerful, although I do think they deserve this. I do think they deserve this after all the ridicule they've been getting this whole expansion. So we'll see how this goes in 5.0. Jumping down onto the next job, we have Dragoon. This job pretty much wins the award for the most guaranteed party slot in all of Final Fantasy XIV. Not taking this job is pretty much next to blasphemy. Dragoon probably has the easiest time putting up raid DPS for the party, and it also just has the highest raid DPS easily. By simply doing its rotation, it just puts out all of the raid damage. It's hard to shake up compositions because of this job, mainly because of its synergy with Bard. It's just insane how much damage it provides with Disembowel. If you take a Bard and then a Machinist, Disembowel is almost already rivaling Trick with that much damage. And then you throw in things like Battle Litany and Dragon Sight, and then there's just, this job doesn't make sense with how much raid DPS it's putting out. And a lot of people like to say that, oh, well, it's a resistance buff, it really shouldn't matter. No, it does matter. It does count, because while slashing is plentiful, Dragoon is the only one with Disembowel, so it is a unique raid utility that it does have. And because of this, using Dragoon borderline mandatory. At least if you have a bard in the party, it's just next to mandatory. It's just really strong. Getting into Dragoon's other utility, you have Battle Litany. While Battle Litany is still really strong for bard, it's basically an AoE crit buff on the party for 20 seconds. The cooldown is 180 seconds, so it's pretty long, but really that's kind of its road to glory, because at that 3-minute marker is typically where the biggest burst on the party has. It lines up with things like Battle Voice, like I said previously, with Bard, so that's also really strong. That's just a bunch of crits and direct hits going out. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, it's a pretty strong buff. Another benefit to this buff is that because it's placed on party members instead of just one target like Chain Stratagem or Trick Attack, is that because of it's placed on you, it's very effective when there's multiple targets, or you know, you could actually use it for things like healing. Even you could just, I mean, you never heal, you know, gambling on crits, but hey, crits are nice, right? You can also just, it's great for AoE, you know. It doesn't rely on just one single target. Someone said this to me, that buffs are always better than debuffs, so, and I think that really shows. And then looking at Dragoon's only other buff, it's a Dragon Sight. Dragon Sight is a tether-based skill, so it only affects one party member, but it has a cooldown of 120 seconds, it lasts 20 seconds, and it gives the party member a 5% damage buff every 120 seconds. It's not the greatest skill. It's great for the Dragoon. It's basically just a personal buff at that point. It's going to use no matter what, and it gives a 10% damage bonus to the Dragoon versus the 5% to the party member, which is nice. But it's not that strong, honestly. It's not the greatest ability, and it does have some pretty weird limitations, especially to the fact that Dragoon is capped at solo play. It can't use all of its damage. So, not that really matters. This is not really about solo play to begin with, but that's just kind of an annoyance I have. Yeah, no, Dragon Sight is just not all that great, but it's not like Dragoon really needed any more raid buffs to begin with. But when you do add Battle Litany with Dragon Sight, the two together do become pretty powerful regardless, rivaling Trick Attack like it should, when you take away Disembowel. So Dragon Sight's okay. You generally don't want to use this on things like pet jobs like Machinist and Summoner because their damage is split. The pet doesn't also get the eye, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is a thing that happens. You generally only want to use Dragon Sight for people who have the biggest burst at the 60 second or 120 second marker, obviously preferably, but generally jobs with a 60 second burst do very well with Dragon Sight. Or at least if they have something on the 120 minute marker too. So you typically are going to be seeing this going to monks and bards, sometimes a ninja too. Ninja does pretty well, it has pretty good burst. So basically Dragoon is very balanced when you take away Disembowel. Looking at Battle Litany and Dragon Sight, honestly I feel like Dragoon deserves its place as the second lowest DPS in the game, because looking at just those two skills alone, Dragoon is pretty balanced. It makes sense that, hey, it's just slightly lower than Trick Attack when it comes to raid DPS, so it should be slightly higher than Ninja personally. But then you add this Disembowel and it's just like, wow, how can anyone compete with that? Like nothing in this game really competes with this Disembowel, at least in most optimal comps, which is pretty dumb in my opinion. So I do hope that does get removed in something like 5.0. We don't need that kind of rigid composition killing job. I think everybody should be able to play whatever they want without being pretty much cut. If we want to go into Dragoon's rotation, I like to call it pretty much a very linear playstyle. The way Dragoon's rotation works is it has one combo that basically applies debuffs, and you have another combo that's just a straight up DPS combo. And at the end of each of these combos, you have Fang and Claw and Willing Thrust, and we'll get into these later, but basically adding all together, you have 5-tier combos for Dragoon, which in my opinion does make it a little less flexible than some jobs, but you know, it's pretty cool to have a 5-tier combo. No other job has anything like that. So the combo system for Dragoon is pretty straightforward and simple, not much to it. But where the real complications start to come out is when you add Blood of the Dragon to Dragoon's kit. And basically Blood of the Dragon is the core of the Dragoon. It's really where you should be focusing. So what this ability does, it's very similar to Enochian on the Black Mage, and what it does is after you finish any of those combos I mentioned earlier, at least on the 3rd tier, you then unlock the 4th and 5th tier, which is Fang and Claw and Willing Thrust. And it depends on, whichever comes first depends on what combo you used, previously. So, you have these abilities proc, and what Fang and Claw and Willing Thrust do is they do extra damage, obviously, and the 5th combo always does more damage, naturally, and it also increases the timer of your Blood of the Dragon. And Blood of the Dragon's enhancements, they don't stop there. So Blood of the Dragon also increases the not the potency, but the damage modifier on your jumps. It increases it by 30% for jump and Spine Shatter Dive. Unfortunately, this doesn't do anything for Dragonfire Dive. Dragonfire Dive is pretty disappointing in my opinion. It's a really cool move, but it doesn't consider it as a jump, so that's unfortunate. But not being done with your jumps at all, it also, whenever you use a jump in Blood of the Dragon, you gain the ability to use Mirage Dive. Mirage Dive is a 210 potency ability that when you use it, it opens an eye on your Dragoon gauge. And this brings us to the most two powerful skills. So you have Garrus Gogol, and this is a thin line AoE that is 230 potency with a low cooldown of 30 seconds. Doesn't really sound all that impressive, but what happens is when you have 3 eyes on your Dragoon gauge and you use Garrus Gogol, it then activates Life of the Dragon. Life of the Dragon is actually a really cool fucking name in my opinion. I think that's awesome, but that's besides the point. So you've had 3 eyes, you use Garrus Gogol, and you usually want to use this when you have a little bit more than about 22 seconds on your Blood of the Dragon timer. And what you do is as soon as you use Garrus Gogol, you gain ability to use Nastron. Now Nastron doesn't really sound all that crazy. It's only 330 potency, which is like, oh, it's just a 100 potency buff on Garrus Gogol, man. I don't know what the big deal is. No. So what Life of the Dragon allows you to do is you get Nastron, and Nastron has a low cooldown of 10 seconds. And Life of the Dragon can last for about 30 seconds, so basically you get to use Nastron 3 times, which makes it a 990 potency move every time you enter Life of the Dragon, which now that sounds pretty crazy, right? I'm sure you think that. Life of the Dragon is pretty damn cool. I think it's a very powerful phase and a very interesting phase. Now I like Dragoon's design because it's not very complicated, it's very straightforward. You can basically just use everything on cooldown. I mean, I don't want to say that's true, but it's pretty true. If you just want to play the job well, you never really have to hold anything, and then the mechanics of the job itself, they're very straightforward. You don't really have to think about it too much. Everything is kind of just laid out for you to where you can just play the job. And I feel like this gives Dragoon a very high advantage over jobs like, say, Ninja that don't do very well in parties that are not optimized, especially your typical party finder where people aren't performing as great as they could be. Especially when you look at Trick Attack, a lot of ninjas struggle with putting Trick Attack up on time. It's a huge problem. If they don't put it in the right place, people have issues with it. It just loses effectiveness greatly. Whereas Dragoon, you can just play your job, and with the press of a button, the buff is there. You're just doing what you're doing, which is kind of why I recommend this more for parties than I would a Ninja. Ninja is not easy in the slightest if you kind of are a new player. You won't be doing as much for your party as you would a Dragoon, in my opinion. The cons of Dragoon you could consider are what I also said were the great strengths of Dragoon. Its linearity can really hinder it in situations where you need to be flexible. Its AoE burst is pretty great, but outside of that burst, its AoE is very lackluster, and it's also extremely resource heavy. You can run out of TP very quickly on Dragoon and not have any other options, especially if you just happen to not have another party member with Goad, and I feel like it's just not worth using. Using any jump actually locks you in animation, and I know this is a meme, so if you're a good player, this doesn't really happen to you very often. But, you know, especially if you're just new to the job, using a jump, especially when an attack happens, can lock you in place and can get you caught in a mechanic, which is very unfortunate because sometimes it leads to a death. That's the biggest meme in 14's history. It's definitely overplayed now, and I hate hearing it, but it is a thing that can happen, so I can't exactly knock it out. But otherwise, this job is pretty much the complete opposite of Black Mage in terms of, you know, what it brings to the party. Whereas Black Mage brings nothing but its damage, Dragoon brings damage for everybody. It's just so much damage that it brings to the party. And along with its friendly design, it makes it probably the most wanted DPS ever. So yeah, that's Dragoon. Now moving on to Paladin. Paladin is definitely the tip top of tanks currently. If Warrior was what I called the mechanic cheeser, Paladin is almost certainly the mechanic breaker. It provides such a high array of defensive utilities, and no other tanks compete with this job or what it can do for the party and almost itself. I'm just going to be straight up with you guys, this job is broken as shit. Like, what the fuck is this? It has so many buffs and utilities that none of the other tanks have an answer to. Like, I don't know who made this job, but I feel like the guy who balanced Paladin kind of needs to be fired. I don't know how the hell the other tanks are supposed to compete with this. Especially with Dark Knight, I feel kind of bad for it. Like, Dark Knight has its things, but Paladin just kind of blows it out of the water, in my opinion. So if we begin with Paladin's kit, at least for its party utility, we can look at things like Intervention. Intervention is basically a single target defense buff. It's a 10% damage reduction buff, and it costs 50 gauge for the Paladin, which the Paladin really isn't using for anything anyway. It's not exactly TBN. TBN is way stronger than Intervention. Let's not get it mixed up. But Intervention can be buffed if you use Rampart and Sentinel on your Paladin, you know, and then it uses Intervention. Intervention itself also gets a buff, you know, with those active. It's still probably never gonna happen. Honestly, a Paladin would probably use Sheltron before they ever use Intervention on something. And the Dark Knight's TBN is just incredibly strong, hands down. I don't think anything is competing with that. But that's not really where Paladin stops. Like, Paladin has an answer to TBN, but then it does more, which is really crazy. But wait, we're not done with Paladin anyway. So if you, let's just set up a situation here. Let's say you're a stupid DPS and you're ripping hate because you didn't use the version. And of course, as soon as you ripped hate, the boss starts casting a tank buster on you. And you're like, holy crap, what the fuck am I gonna do? Guess I'll die. And then the Paladin, you know, he looks at you, he takes pity, probably thought, you know, maybe he forgot to turn the crossroad on. So what he does is he takes his ability, Cover, and he covers the damage for you. You take absolutely no damage, and he just takes that buster on his own, which is insane. This buff, it shouldn't exist in my opinion. It's so strong. You can use Cover to cheese so many mechanics. Like I've seen Cover used to cheese auto attacks even, which is insane. There's a lot of tank swappy moments where hell you could just use Cover and not swap at all. I remember in Ffxiv you could use Cover to cover the melee DPS instead of them having to run away for a certain mechanic, and the Paladin would just take the brunt of all that damage, which is, it just broke a mechanic. Literally, it just broke a mechanic, and this is not the first time, and I'm certainly sure it won't be the last, that Cover has broken a mechanic before. If Intervention wasn't the answer to TBN, Cover is definitely the answer to TBN. It's really strong, and it's super flexible. The only thing, I guess, that you could call a con for this ability is that it has a short range, but that's never stopped anybody before, I can guarantee you that much. But we're not done with Paladin. Oh no, its utility, the list keeps going on. So Paladin also has Passage of Arms. What this ability does is creates a cone behind the Paladin and reduces the damage taken by any party member inside that cone by 15%. It also has a special property of allowing the Paladin to block any source of damage from the front 100% of the time. I don't think I mentioned this, but Paladin can also block magic, which is unique to Paladin, so it has extra forms of mitigation. Not only can it parry, but it can also block, and blocks do a significant amount of mitigation. It's a lot more than a parry. Another special thing about Passage of Arms is because it's similar to things like Collective Unconscious and Asylum. When you place this buff, or when you use it, you could immediately turn it off, and the buffs that were applied to you last for about 5 seconds, meaning that you could lose no damage at all because Passage of Arms is cancelled when you move. You could absolutely lose no damage at all, still gain the mitigation from all the party members inside, and you could still get the block bonus, which means you'll be blocking everything for about 5 seconds, which is really strong. It's basically a replacement for Sheltron too, if things go wrong. I mean, I don't see it happen very often, but you could use Passage of Arms as a Sheltron if you really wanted to. It is kind of a possible personal cooldown. So yeah, Passage of Arms, that's pretty crazy ability already, and we're still not done with Paladin. And finally, the last buff that Paladin has is Divine Veil. Divine Veil is basically a buff that the Paladin gets when it activates it, and when the Paladin receives any heal, I believe all heals do count, the Paladin places a shield on the entire party equaling about 10% of the Paladin's HP. It's an excellent mitigative buff, and it's not too powerful, but it is powerful, and I've heard it's actually used for some LB cheesing, which annoys the hell out of me. But yeah, that's one of the benefits of Divine Veil. You'd think that it would kind of suck because you need to use a GCD heal on it, probably just because you want to activate it. But I've seen some scholars do some crazy tricks with their fairy in order to use Embrace to proc Divine Veil, which is pretty cool. You can completely avoid that at all. But you know, the Paladin's probably going to get healed anyway when this happens, so it's probably not that big of a deal. And then I guess the last ability that I didn't want to quite leave out is Clemency. Clemency is a powerful single target heal that can be used on anyone in the party, including the Paladin itself. But you generally don't want to use this ability because, one, the healers are more suitable in healing, you know, they probably have it, and because it eats a GCD and your MP, and obviously your GCD is very important to be using on damage if you can. You don't want to be casting this. But I guess another unique property of Clemency that it has is that if a Paladin casts Clemency on a nearby target, yeah, it gives 50% of that heal back to the Paladin, which is pretty cool. But yeah, you generally don't want to use Clemency. It's not that big of a deal. So the defense for the party is really where Paladin shines. When you look at Paladin's personal defenses, it's not all that crazy. That's actually where the other two tanks destroy Paladin, in my opinion, is that their personal defense is very strong. It's so solid, especially Dark Knight. In some situations, Dark Knight can completely invuln things with if it just decided it wanted to pop all of its cooldowns. I don't necessarily recommend that, but you could. But Paladin has an answer to that too, so we'll get to that. When you look at the Paladin, it has your typical Rampart. It has Sentinel, which is a 40% damage or 40% damage reduction buff, but it does have a long cooldown of 3 minutes, which is just kind of unfortunate because it has the same cooldown as a Home Gang, and Home Gang is debatably, if not definitely, better than Sentinel. But then after that, Paladin does have Sheltron. Sheltron is basically a skill tied to their gauge, and it allows them to guarantee a block for the next attack. This is pretty good for tank busters, and outside of that, it's not too crazy. But Sheltron does have the added ability of it gives MP back to the Paladin. I think this is really great for realigning their rotation for things like Holy Spirit if things do go wrong with their rotation, because Paladin does kind of have a stricter rotation in my opinion. Also, it's a great DPS ability because it does proc shield swipe whenever you use it, so if you're smart, you know, you can get some shield swipe procs out of that. Also, blocks do generate a lot more mitigation than something like a parry, so it does kind of go a long way, so you know, you want to try and use this. The last personal cooldown that Paladin has outside of Hallowed Ground is Bulwark, and Bulwark basically is a 60% chance to block any attack. This move, it's not bad, right? It's probably really great for things like autos as well when you want to mitigate, because autos do hit really hard in this game. But you want to use Bulwark more for things like for like big AoE trash packs. I think that's really where Bulwark shines. You will mitigate so much damage using Bulwark. But you don't want to be using this for things like Tank Buster. That's quite the gamble to make, and you already have Sheltron for that. It's not like you're using your gauge for anything else, so you might as well just have Sheltron up for that. 60% is just not high enough of a chance, and if anything, if anyone knows anything about RNG in this game, it's that it's never on your side. So don't ever take that gamble. Now, if you want to look at Paladin's strongest ability, that's Hallowed Ground, hands down. What Hallowed Ground does is it makes you completely invulnerable for 10 seconds. This move has a whopping cooldown of 7 minutes. 7 long minutes. So you preferably want to be using this with a plan, if anything, because pretty much are generally only going to get 1, maybe 2 uses of it, if anything, if you use it really early in a fight. So you don't want to use this as a panic. Maybe in the Duty Finder you can use this as a panic skill, but you don't want to be using this as a panic skill generally. You want to have a plan to use this. It's too powerful to just be using it as a panic ability. But basically what Hallowed Ground is, it's generally just I'm gonna break this mechanic skill. It definitely makes, it trivializes mechanics easily. It makes things so great because unlike home game, you can also move around the whole place. It's really cool. You don't have to worry about healing at all, like Living Dead in home game again. You don't have to worry about anything. You can completely ignore the Paladin. Fuck, the Paladin can do whatever the fuck it can walk into mechanics if it wanted to. And you don't get to tell it no. So Hallowed Ground is incredibly strong. It just breaks things, and that's another, I guess, even utility, if you really want to go there, of the Paladin. It trivializes mechanics. Basically, Paladin is an absolute unit defensively, but its DPS is pretty fucking low. Honestly, do I think this makes Paladin balance? No. I don't think it makes it balance at all, even. I think its DPS should be in the ground, maybe even next to like a healer's. Like, when you think about it, Paladin has more defensive options than a white mage, which is really crazy. But Paladin's damage isn't that low compared to its tank brethren. Honestly, it's I think a couple hundred lower than Dark Knight, which isn't too bad. I still think it does way too much damage for what it can do, at least if anything, if Paladin were to keep all of its utility. But anyway, that's besides the point. Let's get into the job mechanics of Paladin. Paladin's DPS rotation isn't very complicated at all. It basically consists of managing a dot and using a filler DPS combo, using a fight or flight to buff that combo most of the time anyway, and then you switch to your magic rotation using Requiescat to buff the magic damage rotation on your Holy Spirit. Paladin does have a few intricacies to it, like using Sheltron to proc shield swipes, but other than that, it's not a very spectacular rotation. The animations do look pretty cool though, I'll give it that. Paladin is pretty pathetic in the AoE department. It just does not have much at all there. All it has is a Circle of Scorns, which is an OGCD dot that is an AoE obviously. Its potency is not that high. And then you have Total Eclipse, which is basically a lightweight 110 potency circle AoE, and it doesn't even generate aggro, so that's unfortunate. Paladin's aggro generation is completely garbage. Rage of Cologne is not that great, and it completely derails the Paladin's rotation in general because you're not regenerating MP using Rage of Cologne. You're generating aggro, and even then the aggro generated from Rage of Cologne is not that great. It's pretty low. When you look at Shield Swipe also generates aggro, but there's a chance that you might not even get that for starters. And then it's just really low potency. I don't know the aggro modifier on that, but it's so pathetically low. It's almost not fair. So in the OGCD department, Paladin does not have a lot of aggro tools going for it. Circle of Scorns also generates aggro, But again, it's so low potency that I just don't know if it's really doing anything for the paladin. I would need to know the aggro modifiers for if anything. So then you look at Paladin's AoE aggros, and well, it has Flash. Flash is pretty pathetic compared to Overpower or something like Unleash that actually do damage. Flash does no damage at all whatsoever, and it costs MP. It costs MP to use. So when you look at it, it's just like, well, damn. Paladin obviously sucks at AoE and it sucks at aggro generation. Do I think this makes Paladin more balanced? Hell no. I don't think it makes Paladin balanced at all still, because, you know, you look at Warrior and Dark Knight, they're going to be pulling all the time, so it really doesn't matter to a Paladin. You know what I mean? So Dark Knight and Warrior just cover all of Paladin's weaknesses anyway. There's not a time where one of those are not going to be in the party for, you know, like a typical 8-man party anyway. So, no, I don't think that makes Paladin balanced at all whatsoever. So in my opinion, there really just isn't enough answers to what Paladin can do when you look at the other jobs. I just don't think any of the other tanks are competing with all of the utility that this job brings. I don't know. I think it's just, I don't know how this passed through the balance team, honestly. I don't know how Paladin got all of these abilities and they were like, yeah, this is okay. I think this is fine. We should release this into the game. I mean, clearly, you have to understand that they didn't know what the hell they were doing when they released Paladin in 4.0. Paladin was so insanely broken at the beginning of 4.0. It was the highest DPS tank easily. Like, none of the other tanks were competing with this job. Especially Dark Knight. Well, Warrior was just stupid. I think all the tanks were actually just stupid at the beginning of 4.0. But Paladin was just stupid for good reasons. So, yeah, Paladin is insane. I don't know if there's really any other job that could top this. Well, I guess there's one more, and we're about to talk about it, actually. So we finally reached the top of this list, this long list that we finally reached. And right now, we're going to be talking about what I think is probably one of the craziest jobs in Stormblood right now. Most of the healers would really kill to have Scholar in their party. Scholar is just unbelievably efficient right now. If this job has any flaws, it probably comes from the player itself, honestly, and really not the job at all, in my opinion. Honestly, I feel like Scholar really lives up to the lore of the job, because when you play Scholar, you have to think like a Scholar, you know? You have to plan for the fight, or else you won't be playing this job efficiently. You gotta use your big brain, man, your galaxy brain to play this job. There's a lot of different ways you could plan for a fight. Obviously, there's probably always a more optimal one, but hey, I mean, you can fucking do it. You have a fucking a skill for every situation on this job. It is ready. It is very much ready. So if you call back to White Mage and how I judged that job, and it was basically focused around using GCD heals to effectively use its kit and to effectively heal in general. Scholar is the complete opposite of that. Scholar is all about off global cooldown heals and trying to use nothing but broil in its dots to get out its damage. It does use its GCD's heals, like every healer kind of has to do every now and then, but it really doesn't want to. But, you know, we can't talk about Scholar without its GCD heals first, because they are very important to the Scholar's kit. So first we want to talk about Physic. There's not much to say here. You generally don't want to be using this. It's weaker than Cure 1 and it's weaker than Benefic 1. It's really pathetic. Try not to use this. If things have gone absolutely wrong, then you're probably using this, I guess, but oh lord, that's really bad. The next spell is Eloquium. Eloquium is a single target shield that cures for 300 potency, but it also places a shield on the party member that's secured with it, which equals the amount of potency that was cured for. So if you were to heal with a 15,000, shield at Loquium, the shield would also be 15,000 points. However, Loquium has a very special property to it, to where if you were to crit that heal, let's say you crit for 15,000, the shield would actually be 30,000 because it doubles when it crits. So that's very important, probably one of the biggest keys to Scholar's kit. And then you have Sucker. Sucker is basically the AoE version of Helloooooooo. It places a shield on the entire party member, the entire party as long as you're within range. And it is basically 150 potency, and it's 150% of the cure that went off before. So nothing too crazy. You generally don't, you probably don't want to be using GCD heals, but you actually can use this pretty effective. So continuing on with the GCD heals, there are skills that are focused around these GCD heals and how you can expand on them. So if you want to go into deployment tactics is very special because what it does is it can take your shields and spread it to the party again. So if you were to use something like Helloooooooo on a single target, right? And you have that shield on one party member, you can spread that powerful shield onto the whole party, which is pretty good mitigation. Especially if the Helloooooooo were to crit, because if it crits, that's a huge shield. You can almost invuln mechanics if the shield is strong enough. It's very powerful to deploy off of a critical hit Helloooooooo. You can also deploy off of a Sucker too. Now, Sucker isn't that great, but what you can do if there was something like, here's an example. If you're in Ulu, right, and you're fighting Garuda has a phase where she hits the party several times over. It's more her bubble phase. And what you can do there is you can, instead of just spamming Sucker over and over again, I've seen some pretty cool strats with Scholars. What they'll do is they'll Sucker the party one time, and what they'll do is they'll have a Sucker on their fairy too, because the fairy does get shields, but the fairy also doesn't take AoE damage. So they'll deploy off of the fairy to use another Sucker on the party, which is insane in my opinion. I mean, I could be saying this wrong. I'm not a Scholar main, so I don't know the intricacies of how exactly this works, but from what I understand, that is how it works. I mean, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but that's insane. You basically just got a free off GCD shield, and it's not a weak shield at that. I mean, Sucker is not weak at all, so I think that's probably one of the most incredible things with deployment tactics. And then continuing on, you have emergency tactics. You won't see Scholars using this very often, but basically what emergency tactics does is it turns your shield into a heal. And all the properties do retain. So if you were to do a 15k Atlo, instead of shielding for 30k, if it were a crit, you would heal for 30k, which is pretty incredible in my opinion. And if you, with Sucker, you basically just get a slightly stronger heal with emergency tactics. It's pretty good, but you don't want to be using this very often. No worry, you probably will be, because you do have better options most of the time. Now we're going to get into the Ether Flow part of Scholar. Because Scholar is Arcanist, just like Summoner is, they both share Ether Flow. Scholar's Ether Flow is a little bit different from Summoner's Ether Flow because first of all, it's used on healing abilities with 1 DPS ability, but it also has a special trait that allows its cooldown to be shortened by 5 seconds every time you use an Ether Flow ability. So Summoner does not have that, but I don't think Summoners would want that anyway. But yeah, that's the important part to Scholar. It has a 45-second Ether Flow, meaning its healing abilities are pretty much always available. I don't think there's any long cooldowns on any of her healing abilities at all, which is key to Scholar's kit. So first we'll name that ability Energy Drain. Energy Drain is the one single DPS ability that I was talking about. It's the only DPS ability available to Scholar when it comes to Aether Flow. It's great for MP regeneration as well, so you don't exactly want to not use the skill if you think you're trying to play it safe. It's great for MP. It doesn't do crazy damage, but it's damage nonetheless. But you don't want to go overboard with this ability, as you want to be using your Aether Flow stacks for healing. It's very important, especially when healing can save more damage than energy drain can provide. So do keep that in mind when you're playing this job. Next up is Lustrate. Lustrate is a single target heal of 600 potency, and it costs 1 Aether Flow stack to use. Pretty much everything costs 1 Aether Flow stack to use, so keep that in mind. Its cooldown is extremely low. It's basically a 1 second cooldown, so you can spam it for heals, but you generally don't want to do that. It's better saved for emergencies when things don't quite go right when you wanted them to. Lustrate's not really bad, but you do have better options if you're planning properly, so try not to use this skill immediately. Try to explore your other options, which obviously we're going to get into. Next on the list is Sacred Soil. It creates a bubble that reduces damage taken by 10%. This ability isn't exactly really bad, but I do feel that you have better options. If not from you, you do have it from your party members, especially something like, Machinists with their Dismantle, or Reprisal from any of the tanks, Scholars Collective Unconscious, Paladins Passage of Arms, on and on. I feel like you could probably find better uses for your Aether Flow instead of just using another 10% damage taken ability reduced. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, but you do have better moves to use. Also, it does have a confliction with Shadow Flare because you cannot use Shadow Flare and Sacred Soil at the same time, so it does have a little bit of an issue with your DPS rotation, which you never want. So try to get, other options from your party members when using this. Next is probably one of my more favorite abilities on the Aether Flow list for Scholar, and this is probably one of their best ones even. It's Indomitability, or Indom for short. Basically what Indom is a AoE heal, and it is a 500 potency AoE heal with a very low cooldown of 30 seconds. This is pretty much what carries a lot of healers, as not a lot of healers have such a rapid answer for this. Because Indom doesn't have damage side to it, I feel like it's a lot more flexible. You don't have to think, oh, I have to use this on cooldown, It can be available when you need it. Versus things like a Size and even Earthly Star to an extent. I feel like because a Size has damage to it, a White Mage is gonna use it on cooldown, if not pretty close to on cooldown, if it really benefits them. Versus Earthly Star is extremely potent. I'm not gonna sleep on that. That's like a Cure 3 easily, and you can put it wherever you want, and it does damage too. But Asteroids are also going to be trying to be using this on cooldown, as it does damage. It's part of their rotation, so they can't just not rely on that. It's very important. But no, Indom is always available, and it's off the GCD, which a lot of AoE heals just aren't, they aren't off the GCD. So that's huge damage, huge potential coming from Indom. You then have Excogitation, or Excog for short. I don't really feel like saying that complicated word over and over again. But basically, Excog is a very special single target heal that is very unique to the Scholar compared to what the other healers have. So Excog is an 800 potency heal, and the cool unique thing about this skill is that it automatically activates when the target's HP falls below 50%. So basically, what's really cool about this ability is that you could just leave it on the target and forget about it, because it lasts 45 seconds. It lasts 45 seconds on the target, so it could be there for a long time, but it automatically activates at 50% HP. So with some proper planning, you can really get some crazy use out of this skill. It's great for tank busters easily. The 800 potency heal, there's not a lot competing with that. I mean, there are obviously things like Essential Dignity and Benediction, but this just has, I think this is doing a lot more than Essential Dignity on average, unless it's something like a home gang. So I think that for a 45-second cooldown, this skill is going a long way. It's great for things like Living Dead especially. It just instantly heals them at 50%. So it's an incredible skill. It's so good. It's for a single target heal with a low cooldown of 45 seconds, meaning you get one per Aether Flow. It's going a long way. It's going a very long way. For the Aether Flow abilities, that is pretty much it for Scholar. There isn't much else, but we're not done with Scholar yet, as we do have to get into the Fairy. The Fairy is basically like a baby White Mage. It just comes along and it does things for you. It's practically like a low-level healer. All it does is it just wants to spam heals for you, and that's it. I guess the biggest road to glory with the Fairy is that, well, it just likes to cast GCD heals. It has Embrace, which is Basically, the fairy will heal anyone in the party who's taken damage. I believe it's like 80%. It starts prioritizing people, but it'll just heal. You know, it's like having an infinite regen on the party, somewhat. You know, but more like single target. But it's like a infinite single target regen that it'll always just keep applying whenever there needs to be healing done, which is incredible because the other healers, they don't have that. You know, they have to spend the GCD to put a regen on anybody, unless it's like collective unconscious. But even then, I feel like the fairy is just way more efficient when it comes to that. It's just always healing no matter what. I'm not going to give too much attention to Celine. Basically, Celine is basically your supporty-ish fairy. It gives Fey Wind. Basically, that's the biggest buff it gives. And it's a slight skill speed buff, very slight. And all it really does is make your opener feel a bit more comfortable, if you want to say that. But that's about it. It doesn't really do much else. So we're not going to talk much on Celine. Eos is really a road to glory here. So what Eos brings, well, a regen. I know I said Embrace was basically an infinite regen, but Eos also brings her own regen, and it's an AoE regen. It's about 860 potency, I believe. And it's up every 60 seconds. Another low cooldown, you know, off the GCD. It's off the GCD for Eos, but it doesn't conflict with any of your casts when you press it, so don't even worry about that. And it's just really strong. It's a great top everybody up and forget about it move, especially when you use it properly with conjunction with other heals. You could get a lot out of this move. The next move that your fairy has is Fey Covenant, which is basically a magic defense buff for 20%. It's not as great as it looks. It is a defense buff in general, but really what it's doing is it's increasing your magic defense stat, so it's not that great, but it is great. I mean, anything helps, obviously, so whenever magic damage isn't coming, you could just pop this, and hey, you know, you're taking less magic damage, so it's a great skill. Finally, you have Fey Illumination. This is your box standard, increasing your healing potency by 10%. It's not that great. I believe if it's like large S and mantra and anything like that, it requires you to use GCD heals to get any effect out of it. So I really don't know how often scholars are using Fey Illumination, but I mean, hey, a buff is a buff, right? And especially when you have a white mage in the party, or you know, you're in prog and you haven't optimized everything yet, and you're gonna be casting GCD heals. This is a great buff to your fucking shields, man. Hey, you know, or any big heal that you plan to put out. So I think Fey Illumination can go quite the long way if you're using it properly. And then finally, Scholar does have Aether Pact. Aether Pact is an ability that you use that is tied to your fairy gauge, and basically, essentially, what it does is it forces your fairy to tether to a party member, probably for a tank, but you know, you can do it to anyone, and it focuses a 480 potency heal every 3 seconds on that target, as long as you have gauge to do so. This move is really great for things like auto attack periods, not too great for burst healing periods, but if you ever want to just carry a tank without, you know, immediately applying a regen, I think Aether Pact goes quite the long way. That 480 potency, obviously it's not the same thing as like, you know, a normal potency heal, because I believe that pets do have lower stats than like a regular player, so it's not going to be pumping out as much heals, but I would assume it's somewhere in the 400 potency range, which is still like cure level every 3 seconds, so it goes quite the long way. Now, Scholar's damage rotation isn't anything too particularly fantastic. It doesn't really do much of anything different from the other healers, you know, dots and a single target nuke. However, there are about 2 skills that are pretty important when you want to talk about Scholar's damage rotation that helps it balance all of these OGCD heals, like, you know, the same problem that, you know, Astro and White Mage were facing. So instead of having a shortened cast, what Scholar does in order to weave its abilities is it has about 2 skills. There's Miasma 2, and basically this is an AoE dot that you can apply. It's 100 potency, and then the dot itself is another 100 potency, so 200 potency. And what it does is it's basically your AoE go-to skill, but it's also instant cast. So you can weave with this ability, and it's a pretty good replacement for weaving when it comes to broil, which is not that much more potency. You know, so you'd probably be losing more potency trying to clip. However, there is also Ruin 2, which is just an instant cast ability, but it's only 100 potency. It's very low compared to Broil 2. So you want to try and avoid this unless you have to move large distances, or you just have to weave a lot. If you have to weave so much and you don't have something like Swift Cast or whatever available. So yeah, I'd say Scholar just handles all of its abilities very well. I want to say probably not as well as Astro, but maybe just as close to well, I'd say. So Scholar's looking pretty good in that department. And then the final skill for Scholar's damage utility, at least, is Chain Stratagem. It's a 15% critical hit rate buff that lasts for 15 seconds. It is a debuff, actually. It's not a buff. So you place it on one target, and it comes up every 120 seconds. So it's great for lining up with things like Trick Attack and you know, other bursts and stuff like that on a 2-minute cycle. It's great for Dragon Sight too. So if you ever want to think about it like that, there you go. So as you can see, with how long we've been talking about Scholar, it just has an answer for everything. It really can do everything, and I think that's just incredible. I don't think any other healer, even Astro, it can't just sit around and it's just like, yeah, well, I can also put up shields. Like, no, it's forced to one stance whenever it does anything. And White Mage has no, other than like Divine Benison, it has no shields, so it can't do that either. But Scholar has regens, Scholar has shields, Scholar has mitigational tools. It just has it all, and it doesn't even have to stop damaging to put those things out there, which I think is incredibly strong. If I were to say this job has any cons, I'd say that it's hard to master, and it's up to the player to really get the true power out of this job. And if you can't do that, then you're holding the job back. Really, it's not really the job that's holding you back. You really have to think masterfully to play this job. So that makes Scholar pretty much unmatched in my opinion. I don't think there's any job competing with this for its spot up here. It's so strong. It provides more DPS to the party without simply just putting up a raid buff, which I think is pretty cool in my opinion. I don't think they could ever... I don't know if they could nerf this job, honestly. I feel like Scholar deserves to have all the ability it has because that's just how Aetherflow works, that's just how fairies work, and I think that's very strong. But if anything, maybe just lower the DPS a little bit, because Scholar technically is one of the highest, if not the highest, damaging healer there is. All the healers are pretty close right now, especially with Echo out. If you look at the parts, I believe White Mage is up there too. But that's still not enough for White Mage, unfortunately. But yeah, no, Scholar it's super powerful, and I don't know if it should be like this, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes with 5.0. I'm interested to find out what's gonna happen. Well, alright, thank you everybody for watching the video. I know it's been a long time coming, and I know you guys really hated that CTS bot, so I did try my best to get a proper mic, but this is the end of the tier series for now. Thank you everybody who's been following all the videos from now. I've got a massive amount of subscribers rather, since the starting of this series. Thank you for the support in the comments, thanks for the advice in the comments. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a like. If you hated it, go ahead and give it a dislike. It is what it is. Not everybody's going to agree with me, but thank you so much for all the support that's been coming out now. This is a new thing for me. So I'm going to go ahead and give this YouTube thing a shot. Alright, well, thank you for watching the video, and goodbye.